Hey guys, tonight we peel back the linen wraps on ancient Egypt, specifically the mystery science still scratches its venerable, imaginary beard about. This is part one. Picture this. The sun, a molten coin, is just kissing the Giza horizon. You're standing there, sand already in places sand really shouldn't be, squinting up at these colossal triangles of stone that seem to pierce the very fabric of the sky. The air is thick with the scent of dust, distant cooking fires, and something else, something ancient and unknowable. You can almost hear the ghostly whispers of a civilization that flourished for millennia, leaving behind puzzles that make our modern Sudoku look like child's play. And let's be honest, if you were actually transported back to the pyramid construction site with a scorching sun, questionable water sources, and a distinct lack of health and safety regulations, not to mention the distinct possibility of being mistaken for a runaway quarry worker, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. Just saying. It's a world away from our air-conditioned comforts and instant information. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps the channel navigate the treacherous algorithms of the digital Nile. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see our little community spread across the globe, united by a curiosity for the past. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself, not as a tourist with a camera, but perhaps as a weary observer, watching the monumental effort unfold on the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid, Pharaoh Khufu's ambitious funerary monument, is under construction. It's a scene of organized chaos, a symphony of human endeavor played out on an almost unimaginable scale. Forget your modern skyscrapers built with steel skeletons and high-tech cranes. We're talking about stone, millions of tons of it, rising layer by layer under the relentless Egyptian sun. The most immediate and perhaps the most enduring mystery that confronts you is simple, yet profound. How did they do it? Specifically, how did they quarry, transport, and lift these enormous blocks of stone with such breathtaking precision? Let's consider the sheer numbers for a moment. The Great Pyramid of Giza, when completed around 2560 BCE, originally soared to a height of about 146.6 meters, or 481 feet. For over 3,800 years, it held the title of the tallest man-made structure on Earth. That's a pretty good run, I'd say. It's constructed from an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. Now, these aren't your garden-variety paving stones. Most of the core blocks are limestone, quarried locally on the Giza Plateau, weighing an average of 2.5 tons each. That's like two medium-sized cars. But then you have the granite blocks, particularly those used in the King's Chamber, which were quarried in Aswan, over 800 kilometers, 500 miles to the south. These behemoths can weigh anywhere from 25 to a staggering 80 tons. Imagine trying to nudge an 80-ton block, equivalent to a modern battle tank or a blue whale calf, into place with nothing but ropes, ramps, and sheer muscle power. Your average Amazon delivery driver complains about a heavy parcel. These guys were shifting mountains. The orthodox explanation, the one you'll find in most textbooks, involves vast teams of skilled laborers, not slaves as Hollywood often portrays, using copper tools to quarry the limestone. For the harder granite, they would pound it with dolerite balls, insert wooden wedges, soak them with water to expand and crack the stone. Okay, plausible, if incredibly labor-intensive. Then comes the transport. They'd load these blocks onto wooden sledges, and it's believed they wet the sand in front of the sledge to reduce friction, a clever trick depicted in some tomb paintings. Again, this makes sense for the smaller blocks moving across relatively flat ground. But what about hauling an 80-ton granite block up the Nile on a barge, and somehow dragging it to the pyramid site, and then up? This is where the theories start to proliferate like Nile reeds. The most common idea for lifting the stones is ramps. But what kind of ramp? Historians still argue whether the primary method involved a single, colossal straight ramp that would have eventually become longer than the pyramid itself and contained almost as much material, a series of zigzagging ramps on one or more faces of the pyramid, or perhaps an internal ramp spiraling up within the structure as it was built. Each theory has its champions and its detractors, its practical advantages and its logistical nightmares. A straight ramp, for instance, would need to be impossibly long and steep towards the top, or so gentle it would stretch for miles. A zigzag ramp would create terrible congestion at the corners. An internal ramp makes a lot of sense in some ways, but leaves questions about how the massive granite beams for the king's chamber were maneuvered through narrow internal passages. It's like trying to get a king-size mattress up a spiral staircase. Only the mattress weighs 70 tons and the staircase is still being built. Then there's the sheer precision. The casing stones, made of fine white Tura limestone, were fitted so perfectly that, as the saying goes, you couldn't insert a knife blade or even a human hair between them. The entire structure is aligned to true north with an accuracy that is, frankly, astounding, something we'll touch on more later. How do you achieve that level of finesse when you're essentially playing Jenga with blocks the size of small cars, hundreds of feet in air? It boggles the mind. Some have suggested that the Egyptians possessed a lost form of concrete or geopolymer technology, casting some of the stones in situ, rather than carving and lifting every single one. This is a more fringe idea, but it attempts to address the almost supernatural fit and finish. Proponents point to anomalies in the stone composition, while skeptics maintain that the evidence points squarely to quarried, natural stone. You watch a team, muscles straining, sweat glistening on their dark skin, as they inch a block into place. The foreman shouts, his voice hoarse. There is filled with the rhythmic thud of mallets, the grating of stone on stone, and the collective grunts of exertion. There's a palpable sense of human will pitted against the stubborn inertia of rock. It's an awe-inspiring, terrifying ballet of brawn and presumably some very clever engineering we haven't fully deciphered. Perhaps they had more sophisticated levering techniques than we give them credit for, or temporary lifting devices we haven't found evidence of. Or maybe, just maybe, they knew something about physics or mechanics that we've forgotten, a trick to make the stones lighter, or the effort less brutal. The silence of the stones themselves holds the answer, and they're not talking. Not yet, anyway. The logistics alone would give a modern project manager hives, food, water, tools, shelter for tens of thousands of workers over decades. It's a monumental headache just to think about, let alone execute with such lasting results. Your gaze drifts from the monumental effort on the pyramid slopes, across the dusty expanse, to another equally iconic and perhaps even more enigmatic figure brooding silently nearby, the Great Sphinx. It crouches low, a colossal lion's body with a human head, seemingly guarding the sacred precinct of Giza. Its limestone flanks are weathered, its face famously missing its nose. And no, it wasn't Napoleon's troops who shot it off for target practice. That's a myth. It was likely defaced much earlier, perhaps by a Sufi Muslim in the 14th century protesting idolatry, or simply through centuries of erosion. Still, even with its battle scars, the Sphinx exudes an aura of immense antiquity and silent wisdom. It's seen more sunrises than you've had, well, anything really. For a long time, the mainstream historical consensus, the story etched into countless guidebooks and documentaries, has been that the Sphinx was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, the builder of the second largest pyramid at Giza, around 2500 BCE. This attribution makes a certain neat sense. The Sphinx is located directly in front of Khafre's pyramid and causeway, and the face, despite its damage, bears a stylistic resemblance to statues known to depict Khafre. It's a tidy package. Khafre builds his pyramid, then carves a giant guardian lion with his own face to watch over his eternal resting place. Case closed, right? Well, not quite. This is where the sand gets a little shifty under your feet. The real riddle of the Sphinx, the one that has sparked decades of heated debate, isn't so much who it represents, but when it was carved. And the key to this mystery lies not in inscriptions or dynastic records, but in the very stone from which it and its enclosure were hewn. You see, the Sphinx wasn't built block by block like the pyramids. It was sculpted directly from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. As workers quarried stone for the pyramids, they isolated a large knoll of limestone, and from this, the Sphinx was born. This also created a deep U-shaped ditch or enclosure around its body. It's the walls of this enclosure and the body of the Sphinx itself that whisper a different story, a tale of water. Lots and lots of water. In the early 1990s, a maverick researcher named John Anthony West, inspired by the earlier work of R.A. Schwaller-de brought a geologist, Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University, to examine the weathering patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure. What Schoch observed was, to put it mildly, startling. The limestone body of the Sphinx, and crucially, the walls of its enclosure, exhibit deep vertical fissures and undulating, coved weathering patterns. To a geologist's trained eye, these patterns are classic signs of prolonged and heavy rainfall eroding the stone over vast periods. Think of how water running down a cliff face carves it over millennia. That's the kind of signature Schoch identified. Now here's the kicker. The Giza Plateau has been an arid desert for a very, very long time. The kind of torrential rainfall needed to create such extensive water weathering simply hasn't occurred in Egypt in the last 4,500 years, the period since Khafre supposedly carved the Sphinx. Egypt's climate shifted from a wetter, savanna-like environment to the hyper-arid desert we know today much earlier, perhaps around 5,000 to 7,000 BCE or even before. So, if the weathering is indeed from rainfall, then the Sphinx must have been standing there, exposed to the elements, before the region became so dry. This pushes its origins back not just a few centuries, but potentially thousands of years, deep into a prehistoric era from which we have very few other monumental structures. Dr. Schoch initially, and conservatively, suggested a date of at least 5000 to 7000 BCE for the original carving. That's a game changer. It's like finding out your grandfather's antique watch was actually worn by a Roman centurion. Naturally, this theory sent shockwaves through the Egyptological community, and many still vehemently disagree. Geologists and Egyptologists continue to debate fiercely whether these erosion patterns are definitively from precipitation or other weathering processes. Orthodox Egyptologists argue that wind-driven sand, dew moisture combining with salt in the limestone, a process called haloclasty, or even Nile floodwaters wicking up through the bedrock could account for the weathering. They point to the lack of any other archaeological evidence, pottery, tools, inscriptions, from such an early period at Giza that would support a civilization capable of carving such a colossal monument. Trying to get a geologist and an archaeologist to agree on this is sometimes like trying to get them to agree on where to go for lunch when one is vegan and the other only eats steak. The implications, if the older Sphinx theory is correct, are profound. It would mean that a sophisticated culture, capable of large-scale stone carving, existed in Egypt long before the rise of the pharaohs, a culture perhaps wiped out or forgotten, leaving only this enigmatic sentinel behind. It challenges the entire timeline of civilization's development. Could the Sphinx be a relic of a lost age, a legacy structure that the dynastic Egyptians later adopted and perhaps even recarved? This brings us to another quirky tidbit. The Sphinx's head is noticeably too small for its massive lion body. It looks a bit like someone put a shrunken head on a giant's shoulders. This disproportion has led some, including Robert Schoch and John Anthony West, to propose that the Sphinx was originally a different creature, perhaps a full lion, or even the jackal-headed god Anubis, carved in that much earlier wetter period. Then, millennia later, Pharaoh Khafre or another pharaoh came along, found this ancient, weathered monument, and decided to give it a facelift, literally by recarving the original, heavily eroded head into his own likeness. This would explain both the ancient weathering on the body and enclosure, as the original structure would have been older, and the dynastic Egyptian features of the face. It's an attempt to reconcile the geological evidence with the art historical evidence. You stand there, feeling the faint desert breeze, gazing at that impassive face. Has it kept this secret for not just 4.5 millennia, but perhaps 7, 9, or even 12,000 years? The thought is dizzying. The stones around it, the ones quarried to create its enclosure, were then used to build the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple in front of it. Intriguingly, some of these temple blocks also show signs of what proponents call rainwater erosion, suggesting these temples, too, might be far older than their conventional attribution to Khafre. The debate rages on, a fascinating clash of scientific disciplines and historical paradigms, all focused on this silent stone beast. One thing is for sure, the Sphinx isn't telling. It just stares eastward, as it has done for countless ages, guarding its secrets as closely as it guards the pyramids. Leaving the wind-swept Giza Plateau, your mental journey takes you south, up the Nile, to a place less starkly monumental but no less intriguing, the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. Imagine stepping out of the harsh desert sun into the cool, dim interior of this remarkably well-preserved Ptolemaic temple. It's much younger than the pyramids, mostly built in the last couple of centuries BCE, but it's constructed on the site of far older sanctuaries dedicated to the cow goddess Hathor, a deity of love, beauty, music, and motherhood. The air inside is still, thick with the phantom scent of incense and ancient rituals. The towering columns are crowned with Hathor's face, her serene, cow-eared visage repeated in every direction, creating a forest of divine femininity. The walls and ceilings are a riot of intricate carvings and painted reliefs, a visual encyclopedia of Egyptian mythology and astronomy. It's the kind of place where you could spend days just looking up mouth agape, like a tourist who's just spotted a celebrity buying discount falafel. Deep within the temple complex, in one of the subterranean crypts, narrow, hidden chambers not meant for public access but for storing sacred temple equipment and ritual texts, you find something truly bizarre, something that has fueled one of the more electrifying fringe theories about ancient Egypt. On the walls of one of these crypts are a series of reliefs depicting elongated, bulb-like objects. Inside each bulb is a wavy line, a serpent, extending from a lotus flower at one end and terminating at the other. These serpentine lines are often shown connecting to a sort of socket or base that looks suspiciously like a jed pillar, a common Egyptian symbol representing stability and the backbone of the god Osiris. Supporting these bulbous objects are figures, sometimes with upraised arms. To a mainstream Egyptologist, these are purely symbolic religious scenes. They represent the birth of a snake god, Harsamptis or Horsematoi, Horus Uniters of the two lands, from a lotus flower, an important creation myth. The lotus flower is a potent symbol of creation and rebirth, and the snake emerging from it represents primordial energy, renewal, or a specific deity. The enclosing bulb is often interpreted as the womb of the sky goddess Nut, or perhaps the amniotic sac from which the god emerges. The jed pillar, being the backbone of Osiris, provides the stable power or life force for this divine birth. It's all perfectly sensible within the complex tapestry of Egyptian religious iconography. A bit like trying to explain the symbolism in a Renaissance painting to someone who only knows emojis, layers upon layers of meaning. However, to a certain breed of alternative researcher, these reliefs look strikingly, unmistakably like giant electrical light bulbs. They point to the elongated shape, the filament, the snake, the socket, the jed pillar, and even what they interpret as a cable leading to a generator or battery, often depicted as a box-like object nearby with figures attending to it. This is the infamous Dendera light bulb theory. Proponents argue that ancient Egyptians, or perhaps a lost, technologically advanced civilization that preceded them, possessed knowledge of electricity and used these devices to illuminate the dark inner chambers and tombs, which often show no signs of soot from torches or oil lamps. It's a compelling image, priests in flowing white linen, not with flickering torches, but with glowing serpent-filled bulbs, navigating the sacred darkness. Now, this is where you have to take a very large pinch of desert salt. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians even had the theoretical framework for understanding electricity, let alone the practical means to generate and harness it. While the Baghdad Battery, a 2,000-year-old clay pot with a copper cylinder and iron rod found near Baghdad, is often cited as evidence of ancient electrical knowledge, its purpose is debated. It might have been used for electroplating, mild electrotherapy, or simply as a storage vessel for sacred scrolls. There's no widespread, unambiguous evidence of electrical devices or infrastructure in ancient Egypt. No power plants, no copper wiring running through the temples, though remember that copper was incredibly valuable and likely to be recycled. The no soot argument is also a bit wobbly. While it's true many tombs have pristine painted ceilings, Egyptologists suggest several explanations. The use of high-quality oils that burned cleanly, mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into chambers during construction and decoration, or simply that any soot was cleaned away or has faded over millennia. Plus, some chambers do show evidence of soot. It's not a slam-dunk case for ancient light bulbs. And yet, the imagery is undeniably odd. The bulbs are quite distinct. The quirky tidbit here is that some alternative theorists have even tried to build working models of these dendrolites, creating low-pressure gas discharge tubes that, when electrified, produce a purplish glow and a snake-like plasma filament inside. The visual resemblance to the reliefs can be quite striking, though this doesn't prove the ancient Egyptians did the same. It's a bit like building a model spaceship because you saw a cool cloud formation. The debate essentially boils down to a clash of interpretations, religious symbolism versus literal technology. Are we looking at a profound mythological metaphor rendered in stone, or a schematic for an ancient electrical device? Most scholars lean heavily, almost exclusively, toward symbolism. They point out that snakes are ubiquitous in Egyptian art and mythology, representing everything from chaos, Apophis, to divine power and protection, Wadjet. The lotus is a fundamental symbol of creation. The Jed pillar is a cornerstone of their religious beliefs. Combining these elements in a scene about divine birth or cyclical renewal makes perfect sense within their known symbolic language. Why jump to a technological explanation when a perfectly valid religious one exists? But the what-ifs are tantalizing. What if the symbolism itself arose from some half-remembered or misunderstood technology from an even earlier age? What if the priests of Dendera were recreating, in symbolic form, sacred objects whose original function was long forgotten, but whose power was still revered? It's the kind of thought that keeps you awake at night, or at least makes you squint a little harder at those temple walls. You imagine an ancient artisan carefully chipping away at the stone, meticulously rendering these strange forms. Was he carving a myth, or was he, perhaps unknowingly, recording a lost science? The silence of the crypt is absolute, the air cool and still. The only light now is the one you're imagining, a soft ethereal glow from a serpent in a jar, illuminating the secrets of a time long past. One thing's for sure, if they did have electric lights, their user manual must have been a real page-turner, probably written in hieroglyphs, even more confusing than IKEA instructions. Your journey through Egypt's mysteries now takes you underground, to a place that feels more like the lair of some subterranean giant than a sacred burial site, the Serapeum of Saqqara. Imagine descending a steep flight of modern wooden stairs into the rock-cut catacombs, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. The electric lights strung up for tourists cast long, dancing shadows, but you can easily imagine the oppressive darkness that would have greeted the original explorers, armed only with flickering oil lamps. Saqqara itself is a vast necropolis, serving the ancient capital of Memphis, home to the famous step pyramid of Djoser. But the Serapeum is something else entirely, a place that pushes the boundaries of what you thought possible with ancient technology and sheer brute force. The Serapeum is the burial place of the sacred Apis bulls. In ancient Egyptian religion, the Apis bull was a manifestation of the god Ptah and later Osiris. A living bull, identified by specific sacred markings, was worshipped at Memphis, lived a life of luxury, and upon its death, was mummified with great ceremony and interred in a truly colossal sarcophagus here in the Serapeum. This practice spanned a vast period from the 18th dynasty around 1550 BCE well into the Ptolemaic period and even Roman times. Think of it as a sort of papal succession, but with prize-winning bulls. Each bull got its own 5-star eternal suite. What makes the Serapeum a profound mystery isn't the religious practice itself, which is well documented, but the sheer scale and precision of the sarcophagi and the challenge of their installation. As you navigate the long, rock-cut galleries, you pass by a series of side chambers or vaults. In each vault, or intended for it, sits a gigantic granite box. There are 25 of these sarcophagi discovered. They are on average about 4 meters 13 feet long, 2.3 meters 7.5 feet wide, and 3.3 meters 11 feet high. The lids alone weigh around 30 tons, and the boxes themselves can weigh between 60 and 70 tons. These are not delicately carved jewelry boxes. They are monolithic giants, hewn from single blocks of the hardest stone, mostly Aswan granite, but also diorite and basalt. To put it mildly, these bulls had better coffins than most pharaohs. The first major mystery is the precision. These massive boxes are often finished to an extraordinary degree of flatness and polish, with sharp, precise internal and external corners. Some researchers, like Christopher Dunn, known for his ancient machining theories, have measured the internal surfaces and claim a level of accuracy that would be difficult to achieve even today without sophisticated machinery. They argue that hand tools simply couldn't produce such perfectly flat planes and right angles on such hard stone, especially inside a deep box. Historians still argue whether these claims of super precision are exaggerated or if conventional methods, patiently applied by master craftsmen over long periods, could indeed achieve these results. Perhaps they had techniques involving abrasive powders and lapping plates that were incredibly effective, if mind-numbingly slow. Then there's the logistical nightmare of getting these behemoths into place. The main galleries of the Serapeum are impressive, but the side chambers where the sarcophagi rest are often quite tight. Some of the sarcophagi are wider than the tunnel entrances leading to their designated vaults. It's like trying to shove a grand piano through a cat flap. Auguste Mariette, the French Egyptologist who rediscovered the Serapeum in 1851, it had been lost to the sands for centuries, despite classical authors mentioning it, found most of the sarcophagi plundered, but one was still sealed. The effort to even move the lid of this sealed sarcophagus, weighing an estimated 30 tons, proved immense for Mariette's team, even with their 19th century equipment. He eventually had to use gunpowder to blast it open, only to find the sarcophagus empty or containing only a few token animal bones, deepening the mystery. Why go to all that trouble for an empty box? Or one without the expected Apis bull mummy? This brings us to the quirky tidbit. Many of the massive granite boxes in the Serapeum show no inscriptions, or only very crude, hastily scratched ones, sometimes on the outside. This is highly unusual for such prestigious royal or divine burials, which typically feature elaborate hieroglyphic texts. Even more strangely, some of the inscriptions that do exist seem to be from a much later period than the supposed manufacture of the boxes, almost like someone found these ancient, unmarked boxes and decided to reuse them or label them centuries later. One theory, quite fringe, is that these boxes were not originally intended for Apis bulls at all, but were perhaps ancient energy devices or repositories of lost knowledge from a far older civilization, later repurposed by the dynastic Egyptians for their sacred bulls when their original function was forgotten. It's a wild idea, but the lack of consistent, high-quality inscriptions on such monumental and clearly important objects is puzzling. You think if you spent decades making an 80-ton granite box, you'd at least put a nice "Here lies Fluffy, the divine bull" plaque on it. The orthodox view is that teams of workers, using ropes, rollers, levers, and immense manpower, somehow maneuvered these sarcophagi down the sloping entrance tunnel and along the main galleries. To get them into the side vaults, they might have employed complex counterweight systems, built temporary ramps, or even partially dismantled and reassembled sections of the tunnel walls. Some suggest the vaults were dug around the sarcophagi after they were placed in a larger, open cutting, which was then roofed over to create the tunnels. This would solve the too big for the door problem, but it presents its own engineering challenges. You stand before one of these granite giants, running your hand over its cool, impossibly smooth surface. You try to imagine the scene: hundreds of men straining in the claustrophobic, lamplit darkness, inching this multi-ton monster into its final resting place. The air thick with dust, sweat, and the rhythmic chanting of foremen. The sheer, mind-boggling effort is almost palpable. How do they achieve the tight turns? How do they lower these boxes so precisely into their niches without them cracking or shattering? The precision doesn't just apply to the box surfaces, but also to their placement. Some of the lids are fitted so perfectly to the boxes that, even after millennia, it's hard to see the join. Were there techniques we've lost? Perhaps acoustic levitation, as some of the more fanciful theories propose? Or just an unparalleled mastery of basic mechanics, combined with an almost fanatical devotion and patience? The Serapeum guards its secrets well. Its dark, echoing tunnels and the silent, brooding presence of these colossal granite boxes offer few easy answers, only a profound sense of awe and a deep respect for the unknown artisans who accomplish these seemingly impossible feats. It makes you wonder if their project managers had access to some seriously strong coffee, or perhaps something a little more divine. Leaving the subterranean gloom of the Serapeum, your thoughts drift to a period of dazzling sunshine and radical upheaval in Egyptian history, the Amarna period. This era, roughly from 1353 to 1336 BCE during the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom, revolves around one of the most enigmatic and controversial pharaohs ever to rule Egypt, Akhenaten. Imagine yourself not in a dark tomb, but under the brilliant, almost blinding light of a newly founded city, Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. This city was built from scratch in the desert, a testament to a religious revolution that shook Egypt to its core. Akhenaten, originally Amenhotep IV, ascended the throne like any other pharaoh. But early in his reign, he instigated a dramatic shift in Egyptian religion. He abandoned the traditional polytheistic worship of gods like Ammonius, Osiris, and Isis, and promoted the Aten, the disk of the sun, as the one, supreme, and universal god. This was a radical move, arguably the earliest recorded instance of monotheism, or at least henotheism, the worship of one god without denying the existence of others. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, moved the capital from Thebes to his new city, and ordered the defacement of Ammonius' name and image throughout the land. This wasn't just a theological tweak. It was a full-blown cultural and political revolution, a direct challenge to the powerful priesthood of Ammonius. You can imagine the priests of Ammonius weren't exactly thrilled about their sudden redundancy package, probably involved fewer gold statues and more looking for new employment. But it's not just Akhenaten's religious reforms that make him a mystery. It's his and his family's depiction in art. The art of the Amarna period is strikingly different from the idealized, formal style that characterized millennia of Egyptian art. Amarna art is characterized by a kind of exaggerated realism, or perhaps a stylized naturalism. And the depictions of Akhenaten himself are, well, strange. He's often shown with an elongated skull, a long, thin neck, a potbelly, wide hips, and somewhat feminine thighs and breasts, a condition known as gynecomastia. His daughters are also depicted with similarly elongated heads. His famous wife Nefertiti, whose iconic bust is a symbol of beauty, is also sometimes shown with a slightly elongated neck and skull in certain reliefs, though less exaggerated than Akhenaten. This unusual physiology has led to a plethora of theories. Was this purely an artistic convention, a deliberate stylistic choice to emphasize the pharaoh's unique status as the intermediary of the Aten, perhaps to make him appear androgynous, encompassing both male and female principles, like the Aten itself, which was seen as a universal creator? Or was Akhenaten and his family actually suffering from some kind of genetic disorder? Historians still argue whether the Amarna art style was a true representation of physical form or a symbolic expression of the new Atenist theology. Several medical conditions have been proposed to explain Akhenaten's appearance, assuming the art is a literal depiction. Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder affecting connective tissue, can cause elongated limbs, a curved spine, and sometimes a longer face. Froelich syndrome, caused by pituitary gland dysfunction, can lead to obesity, underdeveloped gonads, and other feminizing features. Klinefelter syndrome, a chromosomal disorder, can also result in gynecomastia and other atypical physical traits. Some have even suggested various forms of craniosynostosis, premature fusion of skull bones, to explain the elongated heads, though this often comes with cognitive impairment, which Akhenaten, a revolutionary thinker, clearly did not have. Trying to diagnose a pharaoh from 3,300-year-old statues is a bit like trying to guess someone's personality from their blurry holiday photos, speculative at best. The quirky tidbit here revolves around the DNA analysis of the royal mummies. In 2010, a major study was published on the DNA of Tutankhamun, Akhenaten's son, and other 18th dynasty mummies, including one tentatively identified as Akhenaten, mummy KV-55. The study aimed to shed light on family relationships and potential inherited diseases. While it confirmed Tutankhamun was Akhenaten's son and that he suffered from malaria and a bone disorder, the results regarding Akhenaten's specific physiology were less conclusive in terms of diagnosing a single overarching syndrome that would explain all the artistic depictions. The KV-55 mummy did have a dolichocephalic, long skull, but not as dramatically elongated as some statues suggest, and showed no clear signs of Marfan or Froelich. This has led some to believe the artistic style was indeed more symbolic than literal, or perhaps a deliberate exaggeration of certain real, but less extreme, family traits. It's also worth remembering that ancient Egyptian royal families frequently intermarried. Akhenaten married his sister, for example, to produce Tutankhamun, though the exact identity of Tut's mother is still debated. Nefertiti, or another wife like Kia, which can increase the prevalence of genetic conditions. Beyond his physical appearance, the true motivation for Akhenaten's religious revolution remains a profound mystery. Was he a genuine visionary, a mystic who had a profound spiritual experience of the Aten? Was he a shrewd political operator trying to break the immense power and wealth of the Ammonius priesthood, which had grown to rival that of the pharaoh? Or was he, as some have suggested, influenced by foreign ideas, perhaps even an early form of proto-Israelite monotheism? His great hymn to the Aten, a beautiful piece of literature found inscribed in tombs at Amarna, bears striking resemblances to Psalm 104 in the Bible, though the direction of influence, if any, is debated. His revolution, however, did not last. Shortly after Akhenaten's death, his radical changes were systematically undone. His city of Akhetaten was abandoned, left to the desert winds. His name and image were expunged from records, an attempt to erase him from history, a damnatio memoria. The traditional gods, especially Ammonius, were restored to their former glory by his successors, most notably Tutankhamun, who was originally named Tutankhaten. It was as if Egypt collectively decided, okay, that was a weird decade, let's just pretend it never happened and go back to worshipping crocodiles and cats, much simpler. You try to picture Akhenaten, this strange, visionary pharaoh, standing under the dazzling sun, preaching his new faith. Was he a heretic, a prophet, a madman, or a genius ahead of his time? His legacy is a complex tapestry of artistic innovation, religious fervor, and political intrigue. The sands of Amarna still hold many secrets, and the true nature of Akhenaten, both his physical form and his spiritual convictions, remains one of ancient Egypt's most compelling and debated enigmas. The dust of Akhenaten's abandoned city, Akhetaten, settles in your mind, and you find yourself drawn to the most famous name associated with him, though perhaps for reasons Akhenaten himself would never have intended: his son, Tutankhamun. Imagine the scene in November 1922, not in the blazing sun of Amarna, but in the hushed, expectant atmosphere of the Valley of the Kings near Thebes. Howard Carter, after years of painstaking and often frustrating searching, has just made a tiny breach into a sealed doorway. Lord Carnarvon, his financial backer, asks breathlessly, "Can you see anything?" Carter's reply, now legendary, sends shivers down your spine. Yes, wonderful things. He was looking into the antechamber of Tutankhamun's tomb, KV-62, the only substantially intact royal tomb ever discovered in Egypt. It was a treasure trove, a glittering hoard that captivated the world. But with that discovery came whispers, then headlines of something far more sinister: the curse of the pharaohs. Tutankhamun himself was a relatively minor pharaoh. He ascended the throne as a child, around the age of 9, in approximately 1332 BCE, and reigned for only about a decade before dying young, around 19. His main historical significance prior to Carter's discovery was his role in restoring the old religion after his father Akhenaten's radical monotheistic experiment. He changed his name from Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of Ammonius, signaling the return to orthodoxy. His tomb, though packed with incredible artifacts, was actually quite small and modest by pharaonic standards, suggesting a hasty burial, perhaps in a tomb originally intended for someone else. The boy king probably didn't expect to check out quite so early from the royal resort. The mainstream historical fact is that Tutankhamun's tomb provided an unparalleled glimpse into the wealth and artistry of the Egyptian New Kingdom. The golden coffins, the innermost one of solid gold weighing over 110 kilograms or 240 pounds, the iconic gold death mask, the chariots, furniture, statues, jewelry, it was an archaeological sensation. These artifacts have told us immense amounts about Egyptian craftsmanship, religious beliefs, and funerary practices. But it's the curse that has truly cemented Tutankhamun in popular culture, far more than his actual reign. The story goes that an inscription found in the tomb, though the existence of such a specific curse inscription is highly debated and largely unsubstantiated, warned that death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. And then, people connected with the tomb's opening began to die. Lord Carnarvon himself died just a few months after the tomb was officially opened, in April 1923, from an infected mosquito bite that led to pneumonia and blood poisoning. This was the spark that ignited the media frenzy. Fuel was added to the fire when it was noted that Carnarvon had been bitten on the cheek, and Tutankhamun's mummy, when later examined, was found to have a small lesion on its cheek in a similar location. Spooky coincidence, or pharaonic payback. Other deaths followed over the next decade. Prominent visitors to the tomb, members of Carter's team, or people indirectly associated with the excavation. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died of a mysterious illness. Arthur Mace, one of Carter's core team members, died of pleurisy. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier, visited the tomb and died of pneumonia shortly thereafter. Richard Bethel, Carter's personal secretary, was found dead in his bed. His father, Lord Westbury, supposedly leaped to his death from a building, and the hearse carrying his body allegedly ran over and killed a child. The newspapers had a field day, each death adding another layer to the legend of the vengeful pharaoh. It was better than any horror movie script. Of course, scientists and skeptics offer more rational explanations for these deaths. Many of those who died were already elderly or in poor health. The 1920s wasn't exactly a golden age for antibiotics or understanding of tropical diseases. Lord Carnarvon had been in a serious car accident years earlier and was never in robust health. Howard Carter himself, the man who breached the tomb and spent a decade cataloging its contents, lived for another 17 years, dying at the age of 64 from Hodgkin's disease, hardly a swift-wing scenario. Many others directly involved in the excavation lived long and healthy lives. Statistically, the death rate among those connected to the tomb was no higher than for a similar group of people of that age and era. Historians still argue whether the curse was a genuine ancient phenomenon or a media-fueled sensation preying on superstition. The quirky tidbit here is the idea of tomb toxins. Some have proposed that the sealed tomb might have contained dormant, harmful molds, fungi, or bacteria, like Aspergillus niger or Aspergillus flavus, that, when disturbed, could have infected those who entered, particularly someone like Lord Carnarvon whose immune system might have been compromised. The ancient Egyptians were master embalmers, but perhaps they weren't so careful about sterilizing the tomb environment. The idea of being done in by millennia-old supermold is certainly less romantic than a magical curse, but perhaps more plausible to a modern mind. You can imagine the ancient priest, while packing away the king's golden sandals, accidentally trapping some particularly nasty microbes, thinking, that'll teach him to disturb our divine ruler, or at least give them a nasty cough. Modern science has largely dismissed the idea of a supernatural curse. However, the legend persists, a testament to our fascination with the mysterious and the unknown, and perhaps a lingering respect for the sanctity of the dead. The curse served a purpose. It added an element of thrilling danger to archaeology, making it front-page news. It also perhaps tapped into a collective guilt about disturbing these ancient resting places, no matter how valuable the knowledge gained. You imagine Howard Carter, peering through that small hole, the candlelight illuminating the glint of gold. Was he thinking of curses? Probably not. He was an archaeologist on the cusp of the discovery of a lifetime. Yet the shadows in that tomb, the silent, watchful eyes of the statues, the sheer weight of millennia pressing down, it's easy to see how a sense of foreboding, of ancient power, could take root. The treasures of Tutankhamun have enlightened us immeasurably, but the story of his curse continues to entertain and unnerve us, a reminder that some mysteries are more about human psychology and storytelling than about ancient magic. The real mystery might be why we want to believe in such curses, even when logic tells us otherwise. Perhaps it's just more fun that way, leaving the golden, yet supposedly cursed, confines of Tutankhamun's tomb. Your mind travels once more up the Nile to another sacred site, one that presents a visual puzzle so startling it has become a cornerstone for ancient astronaut theorists, the Abydos Temple. Specifically, the memorial temple of Seti I, a pharaoh of the 19th dynasty and father of the famous Ramesses the Great. This temple, dedicated to Osiris and other major deities, is renowned for its exquisite, well-preserved reliefs, considered some of the finest examples of New Kingdom art. Imagine walking through its hypostyle halls, the light filtering down from unseen openings high above, illuminating vibrant scenes of gods and pharaohs. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. But it's not the main artwork that grabbed your attention for this particular mystery. It's a seemingly insignificant detail, high up on a massive stone lintel. There, etched into the stone, are a series of hieroglyphs that, to a modern eye, look uncannily like advanced aircraft. We're talking about what appears to be a helicopter, a submarine, or futuristic spacecraft, and perhaps even a jet plane. These are the infamous Abydos helicopter glyphs. When photographs of these carvings first circulated widely on the internet in the late 20th century, they caused an immediate sensation. Could this be proof positive that ancient Egyptians either possessed or witnessed super-advanced technology, perhaps from visitors from another world or a lost terrestrial supercivilization? It's the kind of image that makes you do a double take, then rub your eyes, then lean in very, very closely, wondering if the ancient stonemason was moonlighting as an aerospace engineer. The mainstream historical fact is that Abydos was one of the most ancient and important religious centers in Egypt, considered the burial place of the god Osiris. Pilgrimages were made here for thousands of years. Setii's temple is a masterpiece, notable for the Abydos king list, an inscription that lists 76 pharaohs of Egypt, providing invaluable chronological data, though it conveniently omits problematic rulers like Akhenaten and Hatshepsut. The temple itself is a testament to Seti's devotion and his desire to legitimize his dynasty. Now let's look closer at those aircraft glyphs. The helicopter is the most striking, with what looks like a rotor blade on top, a tail boom, and a cockpit. Nearby, there's a shape resembling a sleek, modern submarine, or perhaps a blimp, and another that some interpret as a jet fighter or a hovercraft. For proponents of ancient high-tech theories, this is smoking gun evidence. They argue that these images are too precise, too specific to be mere coincidence or misinterpretation. How could ancient artisans, who supposedly only knew about boats and chariots, depict machines that wouldn't be invented for thousands of years? It's a question that hangs in the air, as thick as the imaginary exhaust fumes from that stone helicopter. However, Egyptologists offer a much more mundane, though equally fascinating, explanation: palimpsest. A palimpsest is a manuscript page, scroll, or in this case, a stone carving that has been scraped or washed off and used again, but where traces of the earlier writing or carving still remain visible. Think of it like accidentally saving over a document on your computer, but a faint ghost of the original text still shows through. It's like trying to white out a mistake on an important document, only to have the original ink stubbornly bleed through, creating an accidental Rorschach test. In the case of the Abydos glyphs, the theory is that the lintel was originally carved with one set of hieroglyphs during the reign of Seti I. Later, during the reign of his son, Ramesses II, this area was recarved or replastered, and then carved with a new set of Ramesses's royal titles. Over time, the plaster used to cover Seti's original inscription has fallen away, or the recarving wasn't deep enough to completely obliterate the earlier glyphs. The aircraft shapes are, according to this explanation, the accidental result of the overlapping of these two sets of hieroglyphs. For example, the helicopter could be formed by part of an earlier glyph, perhaps a bow or a hand, being overlaid by a later glyph, like a T sign or a mouth, with bits of both showing through and combining to create an entirely new, unintended image. It's a sort of ancient Egyptian optical illusion. Historians still argue whether this palimpsest explanation fully accounts for all the shapes, but it's the most widely accepted scholarly interpretation. Egyptologists have painstakingly analyzed the individual components of the aircraft and shown how they can be deconstructed into standard hieroglyphic signs used in royal titularies. The rotor of the helicopter, for instance, might be part of a glyph meaning "who repulses," while the tail could be part of a hand glyph. It requires a bit of mental gymnastics and a good understanding of hieroglyphs, but it's a plausible way to see familiar symbols instead of futuristic machines. The quirky tidbit here is that this particular section of glyphs is not unique in the temple for showing signs of recarving. Ramesses II was a prolific builder and often usurped or modified the monuments of his predecessors, including his own father. It was a common practice for pharaohs to update or overwrite inscriptions to reflect their own glory and achievements. It's like tagging over someone else's graffiti, but on a monumental, divinely sanctioned scale. So the idea of one set of inscriptions being partially covered or altered by another is not far-fetched at all in this context. You stand there, craning your neck, trying to make sense of these baffling shapes. Is your brain, conditioned by a lifetime of seeing modern technology, simply imposing familiar forms onto ambiguous ancient carvings? Or are you seeing a genuine ancient mystery, a faint echo of a forgotten technological past? The human mind is excellent at pattern recognition, Pareidolia, seeing familiar objects in random patterns, like faces in clouds or the man in the moon. Could the Abydos helicopter be a grand example of hieroglyphic pareidolia? It's tempting to want to believe in the more exotic explanation. It's more exciting, more mysterious. But the palimpsest theory, while less sensational, has a quiet elegance of its own, revealing the layers of history, the changing priorities of pharaohs, and the very human act of overriding the past. The Temple of Seti I, therefore, offers us a choice: to see a tantalizing glimpse of impossible technology, or to appreciate the complex, evolving story written and rewritten in stone. Either way, those glyphs continue to spark imagination and debate, a tiny detail in a vast temple that has generated a disproportionate amount of wonder and speculation. They remind us that sometimes what we see is heavily influenced by what we expect or want to see. And sometimes a badly erased document can look a lot like a spaceship. Your mental pilgrimage now takes you far south, almost to the border of modern-day Sudan, to the granite quarries of Aswan. This is the source of much of the beautiful hard stone used in Egyptian monuments, the rose pink and black granite that forms colossal statues, obelisks, sarcophagi, and the internal chambers of pyramids, like those in the king's chamber we talked about earlier. Imagine the scorching sun beating down on the vast, rocky landscape. The air shimmers with heat. All around you are the signs of ancient quarrying, channels cut into the rock, piles of discarded dolerite pounders, and the smooth, scooped-out surfaces where massive blocks were once extracted. But one particular artifact here dominates the scene, not because of its completion, but because of its abandonment, the unfinished obelisk. This colossal monolith lies prone in its quarry bed, still attached to the bedrock along its underside. Had it been completed and erected, it would have stood an estimated 42 meters, nearly 138 feet, tall and weighed a staggering 1,200 tons. That's equivalent to about 200 adult African elephants, or 3 Boeing 747s. It would have been the single largest piece of stone ever shaped and moved by the ancient Egyptians, dwarfing even the famous obelisks of Karnak or Luxor. It's a monument to ambition, a testament to the incredible skill of Egyptian stonemasons, and ultimately, a silent symbol of a project that, for some reason, went terribly wrong. It's like the world's biggest oops moment frozen in granite. The mainstream historical fact is that obelisks, known to the Egyptians as Tekhenu, were potent solar symbols, associated with the Benben stone, the primordial mound upon which the sun god first appeared, and the sun god Ra. They were typically erected in pairs at the entrances to temples, their pyramidon tips, the small pyramid shape at the very top, often sheathed in electrum, a gold-silver alloy, to catch the first and last rays of the sun. The quarrying process was painstaking. Workers would pound out trenches around the desired block using hard dolerite balls, a process that must have taken months, if not years, for a block of this size. They would then somehow undercut it from the bedrock. The sheer scale of the unfinished obelisk suggests it was likely commissioned by a powerful pharaoh, perhaps Hatshepsut or Thutmose III of the 18th dynasty, who were prolific obelisk builders. The mystery surrounding the unfinished obelisk isn't what it is, but why it was abandoned. As you walk along its immense length, you can see the quarrying marks, the lines where workers patiently chipped away at the granite. Then, about 2/3 of the way up its length, you see them floss. Cracks began to appear in the granite as it was being freed from the bedrock. These cracks, some quite substantial, would have fatally compromised the structural integrity of the obelisk. An obelisk, by its very nature, needs to be a perfect, flawless monolith to withstand the stresses of being transported, raised, and then standing for millennia against the forces of wind and weather. A 1,200-ton stone needle with a crack in it is not something you want standing anywhere near your main temple entrance. It's like buying a brand new sports car only to find a massive crack in the chassis, utterly useless for its intended purpose. So, the official explanation for its abandonment is these critical flaws. The project was simply too compromised to continue. It makes perfect sense. No pharaoh would want to erect a damaged obelisk that might collapse and kill a bunch of priests or important visitors. Bad for the divine image. But what if there's more to it? Historians still argue whether the discovery of these flaws was the sole reason for abandonment, or if other factors played a part. Could that have been a sudden political upheaval, the death of the sponsoring pharaoh, or perhaps an insurmountable logistical challenge that coincided with the discovery of the cracks, making the decision to abandon it easier? Imagine the scene. The master stonemason, after years of his team's labor, discovers the fatal crack. Does he report it immediately, knowing the pharaoh's wrath might be considerable? Or does he try to hide it, hoping it won't get worse? The pressure must have been immense. The quirky tidbit surrounding the unfinished obelisk is the sheer audacity of the undertaking, even before the cracks appeared. How are they planning to transport and erect a 1,200-ton monolith? We have depictions of smaller obelisks being transported on massive barges down the Nile, towed by flotillas of smaller boats. But the unfinished obelisk is in a different league altogether. Lifting it from its quarry bed, dragging it to the Nile a considerable distance over uneven terrain, loading it onto a specially constructed super barge, navigating it downriver, unloading it, and then raising it to a vertical position using ropes, ramps, and perhaps counterweights would have been an engineering challenge of epic proportions, even for the resourceful Egyptians. Some have suggested that the very act of trying to free such a long, relatively thin piece of stone from the bedrock was inherently risky, and perhaps the cracking was an almost inevitable consequence of the stresses involved at this scale. Maybe they bit off more granite than they could chew. The unfinished obelisk, in its failed state, actually provides invaluable information about ancient quarrying techniques. We can see the trenches, the powder marks, the ochre lines drawn by architects to guide the workers. It's a frozen moment in the manufacturing process, a giant open-air museum exhibit on how to and how not to make an obelisk. You can almost hear the ghostly echoes of the workers, the rhythmic thud of stone on stone, the shouted commands, and then perhaps the dismayed silence when the cracks were first spotted. Standing beside it, you feel dwarfed not just by its size, but by the ambition it represents. It's a stark reminder that even the greatest civilizations have their limits, their projects that prove too grand, their reach exceeding their grasp. Or perhaps it's a lesson in quality control. Always check your granite for imperfections before you spend a decade carving it. What sudden event or insurmountable challenge, beyond the visible cracks, truly sealed its fate? Was it a slow realization of an impossible task, or a dramatic, project-ending catastrophe? The silent stone offers no clear answer, only its immense, cracked presence, a monument to what might have been the greatest obelisk of them all, now forever bound to the earth from which it was almost born. It serves as a colossal lesson in humility, even for pharaohs. From the grounded ambition of the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, your thoughts return north, back to the Giza Plateau, to the most iconic of all Egyptian structures, the Great Pyramid of Giza. We've already touched upon the mystery of lifting its massive stones, but there's another aspect of its construction that is just as baffling, if not more so, for its sheer, almost unbelievable accuracy, its alignment. Imagine standing at the base of this colossal monument, feeling the weight of its 4,500 years of history. It's not just big, it's smart. It's engineered with a precision that seems to defy the technological limitations of its era. The Great Pyramid, built for Pharaoh Khufu, is aligned to true north with an astonishing degree of accuracy. Its four sides are almost perfectly oriented to the cardinal directions. The average error is incredibly small, just a few arc minutes off true north. An arc minute is 1/60th of a degree. To put this into perspective, most modern construction projects will be proud of this level of precision, achieved with lasers, GPS, and sophisticated surveying equipment. The ancient Egyptians, supposedly working with ropes, plumb bobs, and siding sticks, achieved this remarkable feat over 4.5 millennia ago. It's like threading a needle from across a football field in the dark. How did they do it? That's the multi-million-dollar question, or perhaps the multi-million-block question. The mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptians were skilled astronomers. They meticulously observed the night sky for religious and calendrical purposes. Their year was based on the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which heralded the annual Nile flood. It's widely accepted that they used astronomical methods to achieve this precise alignment. Several theories have been proposed. One common method suggests using the pole star. However, the star we currently know as Polaris was not the pole star in 2500 BCE due to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis. The star closest to the celestial North Pole at that time was Thuban Alpha Draconis, but it wasn't a perfect marker. So perhaps they used a pair of stars. By sighting two stars as they circled the celestial pole, they could bisect the angle of their rising and setting positions to find true north. This would require careful, repeated observations and very precise marking. Another popular theory is the solar noon shadow method. This involves placing a vertical rod, a gnomon, into the ground and marking the path of its shadow throughout the day. The shortest shadow cast by the gnomon occurs at solar noon, when the sun is at its highest point. A line drawn from the base of the gnomon to the point of its shortest shadow will point true north or south, depending on your hemisphere and the time of year relative to the equinox. This method is simple in principle, but achieving the accuracy seen in the Great Pyramid would require meticulous care, a perfectly level observation surface, and multiple readings averaged out over time, perhaps around the equinoxes when the sun rises due east and sets due west. A more recent and quite elegant proposal is the Indian circle method, or a variation thereof, using the autumnal equinox. On the equinox, the sun traces a very precise path. By tracking the shadow of a gnomon from sunrise to sunset and marking points on a perfectly drawn circle, one could determine a true east-west line, and from that, a true north-south line. Kate Spence of Cambridge University proposed a method involving sighting the simultaneous transit of two stars, Kochab in Ursa Minor and Mizar in Ursa Major, as they aligned vertically above the celestial pole. This alignment occurred around 2467 BCE, very close to the accepted construction date of the Great Pyramid. This method, if correct, would be incredibly accurate. Historians still argue whether any single method was solely responsible, or if a combination of techniques, refined over generations, was employed. The challenge is not just finding north, but transferring that alignment accurately over the vast footprint of the pyramid, more than 13 acres, and maintaining it as the structure rose hundreds of feet into the air. Any tiny error at the base will be magnified enormously at the summit. It implies a level of surveying skill and a set of tools, however simple, that were used with extraordinary competence. The quirky tidbit here is that the pyramid isn't just aligned to true north. It also incorporates other sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge. For example, some researchers claim that the pyramid's perimeter, if divided by twice its height, gives a remarkably close approximation of pi, around 3.14159. Others point to its dimensions encoding measurements of the Earth, or its latitude being significant. While some of these pyramidology claims can drift into wild speculation, the sheer precision of the cardinal alignment is undeniable and requires a robust explanation. It makes you wonder if the site foreman had a particularly demanding client in Khufu who insisted, no, that's 0.05 degrees off. Do it again. And this time, make sure it also predicts the stock market. You stand there marveling. The wind whispers around the massive stones, carrying the faint scent of the distant city and the timeless desert. It's one thing to pile up 2.3 million blocks. It's another to do it with the precision of a watchmaker on a pharaonic scale. The alignment is so good that it almost feels intentional in a way that transcends mere orientation for, say, religious purposes. It suggests a deep understanding of geodesy, the science of Earth's shape and dimensions. Could they have possessed lost knowledge, perhaps instruments or mathematical formulas that haven't survived in the archaeological record? Were there guilds of highly specialized scientist priests who guarded this knowledge? The silence of the stones offers no direct answers, only the silent testament of their enduring, almost perfect placement. The Great Pyramid doesn't just dominate the landscape. It seems to be in dialogue with the cosmos itself, its corners pointing to the very anchors of the sky. This precision, achieved so long ago, without the aid of satellites or lasers, remains one of the most profound testimonies to the genius of its builders, challenging our assumptions about the capabilities of ancient civilizations. It's enough to make your compass spin, both literally and figuratively, your mind, still grappling with the almost supernatural precision of the Great Pyramid's alignment, now drifts to a nearby site, one shrouded in even deeper obscurity because, unlike the pyramids, its most legendary component has vanished almost without a trace, horror, and the mystery of the lost labyrinth. Imagine yourself journeying south from Giza, past Memphis, into the fertile Fayum oasis. Here, near the pyramid of Pharaoh Amenemhat III, 12th dynasty, Middle Kingdom, reigning circa 1860 to 1814 BCE, ancient writers described a structure so vast, so complex, that it reputedly dwarfed even the pyramids in its wonder and intricacy. This was the labyrinth. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, some 1,400 years after Amenemhat III's reign, claimed to have visited the labyrinth himself. His description is astonishing. He wrote, "It has 12 courts, all of them roofed, with gates facing one another, 6 facing north and 6 south, in a continuous line. The same outer wall encloses them all. There are chambers in it, some below ground and some above, 3,000 of them in all, 1,500 of each. The chambers above ground I saw myself, and I speak of them from my own observation, but the underground chambers I only know from report, for the Egyptian guardians would not allow me to see them, as they were, they said, the burial places of the kings who first built this labyrinth and of the sacred crocodiles." He went on to say that the labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. Other classical authors like Strabo and Pliny the Elder also described it in similarly glowing, if sometimes contradictory terms. It was, by all accounts, an architectural marvel, a sprawling complex of halls, courts, chambers, and colonnades, possibly adorned with intricate carvings and paintings. Think of an IKEA store designed by M.C. Escher, but with more hieroglyphs and fewer meatballs. The mainstream historical fact is that Amenemhat III did indeed build a substantial pyramid complex at Hara. His pyramid, made of mud brick with a limestone casing, now mostly gone, is still there, though in a very ruinous state. Adjoining this pyramid, to its south, was a vast mortuary temple. It is this mortuary temple that is almost universally identified by Egyptologists as the labyrinth described by Herodotus and others. Archaeological excavations, notably by the famous Egyptologist Flinders Petrie in the late 19th century, uncovered the foundations of an enormous structure here, roughly 300 meters 1,000 feet, long by 240 meters 800 feet wide. Petrie found a vast area littered with stone chips and fragments of columns, statues, and reliefs, evidence of a once grand building that had been extensively quarried for its stone in later periods, especially Roman times. This systematic dismantling and reuse of stone explains why so little of the superstructure remains visible today. So, if the labyrinth was Amenemhat III's mortuary temple, why the extravagant descriptions and the name labyrinth? The term labyrinth itself is Greek, famously associated with the Minoan palace at Knossos in Crete and the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. It implies a confusing, maze-like structure. Perhaps the temple's complex layout, with its numerous interconnected courts and chambers designed for intricate religious rituals, and the administration of the cult of the deceased king appeared labyrinthine to Greek visitors unfamiliar with Egyptian temple architecture. Or perhaps the name was inspired by something else entirely. The mystery deepens when you consider Herodotus's claim of 3,000 rooms, half of them underground and containing the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles. While Petrie found evidence of a vast above-ground structure, extensive underground chambers on the scale Herodotus described have not been definitively located or excavated, at least not in a way that matches the legend. This has led to much speculation. Were Herodotus's numbers exaggerated, as ancient historians were sometimes prone to do? Was he misinformed by his local guides? Or does a significant portion of the labyrinth, particularly its subterranean levels, still lie hidden and undiscovered beneath the sands and agricultural fields of Hawera? Historians still argue whether Herodotus's account was an accurate description of a real place, a somewhat embellished travelogue, or a misunderstanding of what he was shown. The quirky tidbit here involves those sacred crocodiles. The Fayum oasis was closely associated with the crocodile god Sobek, who was widely worshipped in the region. Mummified crocodiles have indeed been found in nearby cemeteries. So the idea of sacred crocodiles being interred within or near this complex isn't far-fetched. But royal tombs within the labyrinth, separate from a Amenemhat III-zone pyramid burial? That's more contentious. Petrie did find two massive stone chambers, possibly sarcophagi, made of quartzite, within the labyrinth area, which he believed belonged to Amenemhat III and his daughter Neferupta, perhaps as cenotaphs or initial burial places before the pyramid was ready. But kings in the plural, as Herodotus mentions for the underground section, is harder to substantiate. In recent years, there has been renewed interest in exploring Hawera using non-invasive techniques like ground-penetrating radar, GPR. Some controversial surveys, like the Matahai expedition in 2008, claim to have detected evidence of a massive, grid-like structure beneath the known archaeological remains, potentially corresponding to the lost parts of the labyrinth. However, these results have been met with skepticism from mainstream Egyptology and the Egyptian authorities, and further extensive, officially sanctioned excavations are needed to confirm such claims. It's like finding a treasure map where X marks the spot, but X is currently under a very large, very well-established watermelon patch, and the farmer isn't keen on you digging. You try to imagine this colossal structure in its heyday. Sunlight glinting off polished limestone, painted reliefs glowing with color, a bewildering array of courtyards and halls designed to awe and perhaps confuse the uninitiated. Was it a symbolic representation of the cosmos, an administrative center, a grand monument to royal power, or all of these things combined? The thought that much of it might still be slumbering beneath your feet, its secrets intact, is tantalizing. Herodotus described statues of colossal size and walls covered in painted figures. If even a fraction of what he described remains preserved underground, it would be a discovery to rival Tutankhamun's tomb. The vanished labyrinth of Hawera serves as a potent reminder of how much of ancient Egypt might still be lost to us, either destroyed by time and human activity or simply awaiting rediscovery. It's a historical ghost, its legend preserved in ancient texts, its physical remnants tantalizingly scarce. Does its heart still beat beneath the Egyptian sands, a maze of forgotten chambers and royal secrets? Or is it destined to remain primarily a wonder of the literary imagination, a testament to the power of a good story told by an ancient traveler? The sands of Hawera keep their counsel, and the labyrinth waits, leaving the potentially buried secrets of Hawera. Your mental journey takes you to a different kind of artifact, one not made of stone or gold, but of fragile papyrus, the Turin Royal Canon, also known as the Turin King List. Imagine yourself in the Museo Egizio in Turin, Italy, where this precious, yet frustratingly fragmented, document is housed. It's not visually spectacular like a golden mask or a colossal statue. It's a collection of papyrus scraps, covered in hieratic script, a cursive form of hieroglyphs, painstakingly pieced together by scholars. Yet, this unassuming document holds clues that could potentially rewrite the earliest chapters of Egyptian history, hinting at a past far stranger and more mysterious than the already incredible dynastic record. It makes you think that sometimes the most profound secrets are whispered on paper, not shouted in stone. The Turin King list was written during the reign of Ramesses II, the same pharaoh whose name appeared on that Abydos lintel we discussed, potentially creating the helicopter glyphs around 1250 BCE. It's a list of Egyptian rulers starting from the earliest times and continuing up to Ramesses II's era. What makes it particularly valuable and distinct from other king lists like the Abydos king list found in Seti I's temple is that it includes not just the names of the pharaohs but also the lengths of their reigns, sometimes down to the number of months and days. It also lists rulers who were often omitted from more official monumental lists, such as the Hyksos kings, foreign rulers who controlled parts of Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, and some minor or ephemeral pharaohs. This makes it an invaluable, though imperfect, chronological resource for Egyptologists. It's like finding an ancient accountant's ledger that accidentally recorded the secret reigns of forgotten kings. The mainstream historical fact is that the Turin Papyrus, despite its damaged state, it was reportedly intact when discovered by Bernardino Drevetti in Luxor around 1820, but was severely damaged during transit to Italy, provides crucial data for constructing the timeline of Egyptian pharaohs. Scholars like Jean-François Champollion, the decipherer of hieroglyphs, and later Gustavus Seyfarth worked tirelessly to reconstruct it from over 300 fragments. It helps to corroborate and sometimes correct information found in other king lists, and in the writings of Manetho, an Egyptian priest who wrote a history of Egypt in Greek in the 3rd century BCE. Now here's where the Turin king list veers into truly mysterious territory, the part that makes alternative historians and seekers of lost civilizations sit up and pay very close attention. Before listing the known historical pharaohs, the kings of the early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom, the papyrus details earlier, pre-dynastic epochs of rule. It lists a succession of divine rulers, gods who reigned over Egypt for immensely long periods. For example, it mentions the god Ptah ruling for thousands of years, followed by Ra, Shu, Geb, Osiris, Set, and Horus, each with similarly vast reigns. Okay, this is fairly standard mythology, gods ruling in a golden age before mortals. Many cultures have similar foundation myths. But then, the papyrus lists another group of rulers after the great gods but before Menes, the traditional first human pharaoh who unified Upper and Lower Egypt. This intermediary group is often translated as followers of Horus or Shemsu-Hor, and also sometimes as the spirits, the demigods, or the Aku. They too are credited with ruling for incredibly long periods, spanning thousands of years. And after them, there's mention of rulers from various locations like Memphis and the north, still before the conventional First Dynasty. Who were these followers of Horus? Were they purely mythological beings, a way of bridging the gap between divine rule and human kingship? Or does this section of the Turin Papyrus hint at a forgotten era of actual rulers, perhaps highly advanced or semi-divine kings, whose reigns were later mythologized into these vast time frames? Historians still argue whether this pre-dynastic section of the Turin king list should be interpreted literally, symbolically, or as a garbled transmission of very ancient oral traditions. Mainstream Egyptology generally views these early entries as mythological or legendary, reflecting the Egyptians' own understanding of their deep past and the divine origins of kingship. They see it as a way to legitimize the pharaonic line by connecting it directly to the gods. The quirky tidbit here is the sheer length of these supposed pre-dynastic reigns. If you add up all the years attributed to the gods and the Shemsu-Hor in the Turin Papyrus and in Manetho's king list, which draws on similar sources, you get a timeline for Egyptian civilization that stretches back tens of thousands of years before the First Dynasty, circa 3100 BCE. This is far, far older than the conventionally accepted timeline for the rise of complex society in Egypt. While archaeologists have found evidence of prehistoric cultures in the Nile Valley dating back many millennia, like the Badarian and Akkadian cultures, these are generally not considered to have been unified kingdoms ruled by demigods. So, what were we to make of these vast reigns? Were they symbolic numbers, or could they refer to something else, perhaps dynasties rather than individual rulers, or a different way of reckoning time? It's like reading a company history that claims its first CEO was Zeus, who reigned for 9,000 years and had amazing quarterly returns. This is where the theories of a lost, highly advanced civilization, an antediluvian culture that predates dynastic Egypt, often find support. Proponents suggest that the term papyrus, along with Manetho's similar accounts, preserves a genuine, albeit distorted, memory of this incredibly ancient period of high culture, which was later attributed to gods and demigods when its true nature was forgotten. Could the followers of Horus have been the survivors of such a lost civilization, passing on their knowledge to the early dynastic Egyptians? You gaze at the fragments of papyrus, trying to decipher not just the script, but the deeper meaning behind it. Was a scribe who painstakingly copied out this list in Ramesses II's time merely recording ancient myths? Or was he preserving a lineage that stretched back into a time before time, an epic of wonders that our current historical models don't accommodate? The Turin King list, with its tantalizing hints of divine and semi-divine rulers, challenges us to consider the limits of our knowledge about Egypt's deepest past. It's a fragile bridge to an almost unimaginable antiquity, a document that asks more questions than it answers. It reminds us that history, as we know it, might only be the final chapter of a much, much longer story. From the cryptic lineages of the term papyrus, your thoughts turn to one of the most iconic and visceral aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization, mummification. This complex, elaborate process of preserving the human body after death is synonymous with Egypt, conjuring images of linen-wrapped figures, ornate sarcophagi, and the promise of an afterlife. Imagine yourself in the hushed atmosphere of an embalmer's workshop, or wabit, meaning pure place, likely a temporary structure set up near the Nile or the burial site. The air is thick with the scent of resins, natron, oils, and perhaps something less pleasant. This isn't just a practical procedure. It's a sacred ritual, a technological marvel, and a profound mystery that hints at knowledge and purposes beyond mere physical preservation. The mainstream historical fact is that mummification was practiced in Egypt for over 3,000 years, evolving significantly over time. The most elaborate techniques, particularly those used for royalty and the wealthy during the New Kingdom, the era of Tutankhamun and Ramesses II, involved several key steps. First, the brain was usually removed, often through the nostrils using long hooks, a delicate procedure that, if done clumsily, could disfigure the face. Imagine trying to perform a nasal endoscopy with a bent coat hanger. The internal organs, lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, were then removed through an incision in the left flank and preserved separately in canopic jars, each dedicated to one of the four sons of Horus. The heart, considered the seat of intellect and emotion, was typically left in the body, as it would be weighed against the feather of Mat, truth, in the afterlife. The body was then thoroughly cleansed and packed with natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture, sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, harvested from dry lake beds like Wadi el Natron. This was the crucial dehydrating agent. The body would be left covered in natron for about 40 days, though some sources say up to 70 days for the entire process, until it was completely desiccated. After the natron was removed, the shrunken, dried body was washed again, anointed with oils and resins like frankincense and myrrh, which had antibacterial properties, and its cavities, skull, torso, were packed with linen, sawdust, or other materials to restore a more lifelike shape. Finally, the body was meticulously wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages, with amulets and magical spells often placed between the layers to protect the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. The whole process was a lengthy, expensive, and highly skilled undertaking. But beyond these well-documented practical steps, what esoteric knowledge or deeper purposes might have been involved? This is where the mystery unfurls like a mummy's shroud. The Egyptians believed that preserving the physical body was essential for the survival of the Ka life force and Bia soul or personality, and their eventual reunification with the body to achieve resurrection as an an effective, glorified spirit in the afterlife. So, the better the preservation, the better the chances of a successful eternity. However, some researchers speculate that mummification was about more than just creating a recognizable vessel for the soul. Were there attempts to preserve something more than just flesh and bone? Could certain organs or the body as a whole have been treated in ways designed to retain a kind of vital energy or consciousness, even in a dormant state? Historians still argue whether the primary goal was purely physical preservation for soul recognition, or if there were more subtle, alchemical, or energetic considerations at play. The quirky tidbit here revolves around the brain. While it was usually removed and discarded, apparently, the Egyptians didn't consider it as important as the heart, a major miscalculation from a modern neurological perspective. There are instances, particularly in earlier periods or with less elaborate mummifications, where the brain was left in situ. And even when it was removed, the methods were specific. Why through the nose? Was it simply the most direct route, or was there a belief that this pathway had some ritualistic or energetic significance? Some fringe theories even propose that certain mummification techniques, perhaps involving specific resins or magnetic alignments, were aimed at creating a kind of spiritual battery or a focal point for consciousness, even after death. This is highly speculative, of course, venturing into areas far beyond mainstream Egyptology. It's like suggesting your smartphone's battery life could be extended by wrapping it in frankincense-soaked linen, intriguing, but lacking hard evidence. Consider also the incredible longevity of some mummies. While not all mummifications were successful, and many bodies have deteriorated over millennia, some, like the remarkably well-preserved mummy of Ramesses II, still retain discernible facial features, hair, and even skin texture after more than 3,000 years. This speaks to an extraordinary understanding of decomposition processes and preservation chemistry. What was the precise formula of their anointing oils and resins? Some of these substances were imported from distant lands, indicating complex trade networks and a high value placed on these specific ingredients. Were there secret ingredients or ritualistic preparations that enhanced their preservative qualities in ways we don't fully understand? The priests who performed a mummification were highly trained specialists, combining surgical skill with ritual knowledge. The chief embalmer, known as the Ares Sashida or overseer of the mystery, often wore a jackal mask representing Anubis, the god of mummification and the afterlife. This indicates the deeply sacred nature of the work. Were they merely following a set of practical instructions, or were they privy to esoteric teachings about life, death, and the subtle energies of the human body? The very act of wrapping, the intricate layering of linen, the placement of amulets, each step was imbued with magical and religious significance. The opening of the mouth ceremony, performed the mummy or statue of the deceased before burial, was intended to ritually restore the senses, sight, hearing, speech, the ability to eat and drink for use in the afterlife. This suggests a belief that the mummified body was not entirely inert, but capable of being reanimated or resensitized on some level. You imagine the embalmers, working by lamplight, their movements precise and reverent. They are not just preserving a corpse, they are preparing a soul for eternity, engaging in a sacred technology designed to cheat oblivion. The secrets of their most potent techniques, the full extent of their understanding of the human body, and the processes of decay and preservation may still be wrapped within the linen folds of the countless mummies that lie in museums and hidden tombs. Mummification stands as a testament to Egypt's profound preoccupation with death and the afterlife, but also, perhaps, to a level of biological and chemical knowledge that, in some respects, we are still working to unravel. They weren't just pickling their pharaohs. They were, in their own way, trying to unlock the secrets of immortality. Leaving the fragrant, resinous atmosphere of the embalmer's workshop, your focus shifts back to the colossal stone monuments that define ancient Egypt, particularly the pyramids. We've pondered how the massive blocks were lifted and aligned, but what if some of those blocks weren't carved from natural stone at all? This brings us to a controversial and fascinating theory, the idea that some of the pyramid stones, particularly the precision-fitted casing stones and perhaps even some core blocks, were not quarried and shaped in the traditional sense, but were cast in place, much like modern concrete. This is the geopolymer or cast stone theory, most famously championed by Professor Joseph Davidovits, a French materials scientist. Imagine the scene at Giza again. Instead of endless teams hauling multi-ton blocks up massive ramps, picture a different kind of activity. Workers mixing a slurry of crushed limestone, lime, natron, and other locally available minerals with water, then pouring this mixture into wooden or clay molds directly on the pyramid as it rose, layer by layer. The mixture would then harden, forming blocks that were perfectly shaped to fit their neighbors, explaining the astonishing precision we see, especially in the now-lost casing. It sounds almost too simple, too modern for ancient Egypt, yet proponents argue it solves many of the logistical and engineering puzzles that orthodox theories struggle with. It's like suggesting they built their Lego castle not by finding perfectly shaped bricks, but by having a Lego slurry machine that squirted out custom bricks on demand. The mainstream historical fact is that the vast majority of Egyptologists and geologists maintain that the pyramid stones are indeed natural, quarried limestone and granite. They point to extensive geological evidence, the quarry marks visible on many blocks, the distinct layering, strata, within the stones that matches the geology of the nearby quarries, and the presence of fossil shells, like nummulites, naturally occurring in the limestone beds of the Giza Plateau, which are also found distributed within the pyramid blocks in a way consistent with natural stone. The orthodox view is that the Egyptians were master stonemasons, and their achievements, while astounding, were accomplished through ingenuity, immense manpower, and conventional tools like copper chisels, dolerite pounders, and wooden levers. However, Professor Davidovits, beginning in the 1980s, proposed that the ancient Egyptians possessed a sophisticated knowledge of geopolymer chemistry. Geopolymers are inorganic, cement-like materials that harden at relatively low temperatures. He suggested that the casing stones of the Great Pyramid and perhaps some core blocks were made from a kind of ancient concrete and agglomerated limestone using materials readily available in Egypt, soft limestone which could be easily disaggregated, natron, a powerful alkali remembered from mummification, lime produced by heating limestone, and water from the Nile. According to his theory, workers would quarry the soft limestone, crush it, mix it with the other ingredients to create a wet slurry, transport this slurry in buckets or baskets up the pyramid, and then pack it into molds. The blocks would then cure and harden in place, forming a perfectly interlocked structure. This theory offers potential solutions to several enduring mysteries. It could explain the incredible precision of the casing stones, fitted so tightly that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. Casting would allow for perfectly matched surfaces. It could also explain how some of the heavier or awkwardly shaped blocks were raised and positioned. Carrying slurry is much easier than hauling a multi-ton pre-carved block. Furthermore, Davidovits and others have pointed to certain anomalies in samples from pyramid blocks, such as a higher water content than natural quarry stone, organic fibers perhaps from plant material used in the mix or from the molds, and air bubbles aligned in a way that suggests casting rather than natural sedimentation. Some blocks also appear to have a higher density at the bottom than at the top, as if the heavier aggregate settled during curing. Historians still argue vehemently over the validity of the cast stone theory. Geologists who have examined pyramid stones often refute Davidovits's claims, stating that the microstructure, fossil content, and chemical composition are entirely consistent with natural limestone from the Giza or Tura quarries. They argue that any anomalies can be explained by natural variations in the stone or by weathering processes over millennia. The debate often gets quite technical, involving scanning electron microscopy, X-ray diffraction, and petrographic analysis. It's a battle of the experts, with geologists on one side and materials scientists on the other, each looking at the same stones but drawing very different conclusions. It's like two chefs arguing whether a cake was baked from scratch or from a premix, based on the crumb structure. The quirky tidbit here is that the ancient Egyptians were undoubtedly masters of synthetic materials in other contexts. They invented Egyptian faience, a type of glazed non-clay ceramic, which is essentially a man-made self-glazing stone. They were also skilled at making plaster and mortars. So the idea that they might have experimented with or developed a form of geopolymer concrete is not entirely out of character with their known technological capabilities. The question is whether they applied this knowledge on the monumental scale of the pyramids. Davidovitz even suggests that the hieroglyphic term for stone could also encompass synthetic stone, and that certain texts might allude to these casting techniques, though these interpretations are highly contested. If some pyramid stones were cast, it doesn't necessarily diminish the achievement of the ancient Egyptians. It simply shifts the nature of their genius from purely stone carving and heavy lifting to sophisticated chemistry and material science. It would imply a lost technology, a forgotten recipe for high-quality, durable concrete that, in some ways, rivals our modern Portland cement. You stand before a pyramid block, running your hand over its weathered surface. Is it a piece of the ancient Nummulitic seabed, hewn and hauled with immense effort? Or is it a testament to a forgotten alchemical art, a liquid stone poured and hardened by human hands? The cast stone theory remains on the fringes of accepted Egyptology, but it refuses to go away, persistently challenging the orthodox narrative. It forces us to look at these familiar monuments with fresh eyes, to question our assumptions, and to consider that the ancient Egyptians might have been even more ingenious and in different ways than we currently imagine. The stones themselves may hold the answer, if only we knew exactly how to make them talk. Your gaze lifts from the individual blocks of the pyramids, whether carved or cast, and travels upwards, to their very apexes, to where a crucial crowning element once sat, the pyramid or capstone. Imagine the Great Pyramid in its original glory, not the tiered, sandy-brown monument we see today, but a gleaming, smooth-sided structure cased in brilliant white Tura limestone. And at its very peak, catching the first rays of dawn and the last gleam of sunset, would have been this special capstone. These pyramid ions were not just the final piece of the puzzle. They were imbued with immense religious and symbolic significance. But like so many ancient treasures, most of them have vanished, leaving behind a rather pointed mystery. A pyramid ion is essentially a miniature pyramid, perfectly shaped to sit atop the main structure. They were typically made from a single hard and often polished stone, such as granite, basalt, or diorite. Some were inscribed with the pharaohs' names and titles, and with religious iconography related to the sun god Ra. For example, the pyramid ion of Amenemhat III from his Dashur pyramid, not the Hera one with the labyrinth, he built more than one, is made of black granite, beautifully polished, and inscribed with prayers and depictions of the king offering to gods. It's now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and is a stunning piece of craftsmanship. It gives us a good idea of what these capstones looked like, at least for Middle Kingdom pyramids. The mainstream historical fact is that pyramid ions served as the focal point of the pyramid solar symbolism. They represented the Benben stone, the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos, upon which the creator god first appeared. As the highest point of the pyramid, they were the first to be touched by the sun's rays, symbolically linking the deceased pharaoh, who was identified with Ra, to the heavens and ensuring his rebirth with the daily rising of the sun. Their placement would have been a moment of great triumph and religious ceremony, marking the completion of the monumental project. Now here's the mystery. What were the pyramid ions of the Great Giza pyramids, particularly Khufu's, made of? And why are they missing? We have the pyramid ion of Amenemhat III and fragments or descriptions of others from smaller pyramids. But for the largest and most famous pyramids on Earth, their capstones are gone without a definitive trace or undisputed example. The top of the Great Pyramid today is a flat platform, large enough to hold several people. It wasn't always like this. It's as if the most important jewel from the crown has been plucked. There are several theories about what these Giza pyramid ions were made of. One popular and tantalizing idea is that they were sheathed in, or even made entirely of precious metals like gold or electrum, that natural alloy of gold and silver. Imagine a golden capstone, blazing in the Egyptian sun, visible for miles around, a beacon of divine power. This would certainly fit with the solar symbolism and the immense wealth of the pharaohs who built these structures. Herodotus mentions that the summit of the pyramid was finished first, though his accounts are sometimes debated. If they were gold, it would also explain why they are missing. Gold is, and always has been, highly prized and easily looted and melted down. It would be an irresistible target for tomb robbers and later conquerors. A giant gold nugget sitting on top of a pyramid? It's like putting a sign on it saying, "Rob me first." However, there's no direct, unequivocal archaeological evidence like a surviving Giza capstone made of solid gold, or even fragments clearly identified as such to prove this. Some scholars argue that solid gold pyramid ions of that size would have been incredibly heavy and prohibitively expensive, even for a pharaoh. More likely, they suggest, the Giza pyramid ions were made of fine stone like granite, perhaps Tara limestone similar to the casing, and then possibly overlaid with gold or electrum sheeting. This would still give the glittering effect but be more structurally sound and slightly less outrageously expensive. Historians still argue whether the primary material was stone, metal-sheathed stone, or solid metal. The existing pyramid ion of Amenemhat III is polished black granite, not metal, but it's from a later period and a different style of pyramid. Could practices have differed? The quirky tidbit here concerns what might be on the top of the Great Pyramid now, or what might have been there immediately after the original pyramid ion was lost. There are accounts from medieval and early modern travelers who climbed the Great Pyramid and described the flat top. Some even mention cavities or sockets on this platform, perhaps where the pyramid ion was once anchored, or where later, less grand, markers might have been placed. There's even a rather persistent urban legend that the original capstone of the Great Pyramid is hidden away somewhere, perhaps in a secret vault, or even that it possessed magical properties. No evidence supports this, of course, but it adds to the mystique. Others suggest that perhaps the original capstone was deliberately removed during a later period for religious or political reasons, not just simple looting. Another possibility for their disappearance is natural causes. An earthquake could have dislodged them. Lightning strikes, attracted to a metal capstone, could have damaged them or the surrounding masonry, leading to their eventual collapse or removal for safety. Over thousands of years, even the best-made structures suffer. The absence of these crowning glories is frustrating. They would have been the ultimate expression of the pyramid's purpose and the pharaoh's power. To see the Great Pyramid today without its smooth casing and its shining capstone is like seeing a magnificent cathedral with its spire missing and its stained glass windows boarded up, still impressive but incomplete. You try to visualize it, the sun rising over the desert, its first light striking that magnificent, perhaps golden apex. It must have been an awe-inspiring sight, a tangible link between the earthly realm and the divine. The missing pyramid ions represent not just lost artifacts, but a lost piece of the pyramid's soul, its most potent symbol of connection to the sun god. Their absence leaves a literal and figurative hole in our understanding of these ancient wonders, a final, glittering mystery at the very top of Egypt's greatest achievements. What truly happened to them, And what they were truly like remains one of the tantalizing what-ifs of Egyptian archaeology. As our journey through the mysteries of ancient Egypt begins to wind down for tonight, your thoughts coalesce around a final, overarching enigma, one that underpins many of the puzzles we've explored, the tantalizing hints of vanished tools and lost wisdom. We've marveled at the precision of the pyramids, the colossal scale of the serapeum boxes, the potential for advanced chemistry in mummification or cast stone, and the sophisticated astronomical alignments. All these achievements seem to push the boundaries of what should have been possible with the conventionally accepted toolkit of the ancient Egyptians. This raises a profound question. Did they possess certain tools, techniques, or a level of scientific understanding that has since been lost to time, leaving only its remarkable products as silent witnesses? Imagine sifting through the sands of Egypt, not for golden treasures, but for the faint, scattered clues of this lost technological baseline. These clues are not always obvious. They are often subtle anomalies, unexplained details, or feats of engineering that seem just a little too advanced for copper chisels, stone pounders, and wooden rollers. It's like finding a perfectly machined screw in a collection of Stone Age hand axes. It just doesn't quite fit the expected picture. The mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Egyptian toolkit, as reconstructed from archaeological finds and tomb depictions, was ingenious but essentially Neolithic and Bronze Age in character. For quarrying and stoneworking, they used copper tools, chisels, saws, drills, which, being a relatively soft metal, would have required constant resharpening, especially when working hard stones like granite. They used harder stone tools like dolerite pounders. They employed wooden levers, rollers, and sledges for moving heavy objects, and likely vast amount of manpower. Their surveying tools included plumb bobs, square levels, and sighting instruments. There's no doubt they achieved incredible feats with these relatively simple means, through sheer skill, patience, and organization. However, certain anomalies persist. Consider the precision drilling in hard stones like granite or diorite. Archaeologists like Sir Flinders Petrie, one of the fathers of modern Egyptology, meticulously studied drill cores and holes found in ancient Egyptian artifacts. He noted that some drill holes exhibited spiral grooves or rifling, with a remarkably consistent pitch, suggesting a very steady and rapid cutting action. He also observed that the drill seemed to cut faster through harder materials like quartz crystals within the granite than through the softer feldspar matrix, which is counterintuitive for a simple abrasive drill. This led him, and later researchers like Christopher Dunn, to suggest that the Egyptians might have used some form of advanced drilling technology, perhaps even ultrasonic drilling or drills with hardened jewel bits, to achieve such results. The tools themselves, if made of metal more advanced than copper, might have corroded away or been recycled, leaving only their telltale marks on the stone. Then there are the perfectly flat surfaces and sharp internal corners seen on some granite boxes, like those in the Serapeum or the granite sarcophagus in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Achieving such precision on large, hard stone surfaces using only hand pounding and polishing with abrasives is an immense challenge. Proponents of lost high technology argue that these features point to the use of sophisticated machining techniques, perhaps large-scale saws or planing tools that we haven't found. Historians still argue whether these perceived anomalies are truly beyond the capabilities of conventional ancient methods, or if we simply underestimate the incredible skill and time the Egyptians were willing to invest. It's a debate about the limits of human ingenuity with basic tools versus the possibility of forgotten advanced ones. The quirky tidbit here involves Pyrie Reis style maps or other out-of-place artifacts, UPARTs, that some try to connect to ancient Egypt, suggesting a lost global surveying knowledge or contact with other advanced cultures. While direct links to Egypt are often tenuous and highly speculative for many such UPARTs, the idea of lost ancient wisdom is a recurring theme. Could the Egyptians have inherited knowledge from an even earlier, now vanished civilization, as hinted at by the term papyrus's divine rulers, or the water weathering on the Sphinx? If such a precursor civilization existed and possessed advanced technology, perhaps only fragments of their knowledge survive into dynastic Egyptian times, manifesting as these inexplicable technological leaps. This is, of course, deep into fringe territory, but it fuels the imagination. It's like finding a faded circuit diagram tucked inside a medieval illuminated manuscript, a confusing but tantalizing hint of something more. The very fact that we are still debating how the pyramids were built, after centuries of study, suggests that some crucial pieces of the puzzle might be missing. Whether specialized guilds of artisans who possess secret techniques passed down orally, techniques that were never recorded or whose records have been lost. Consider the incredible organizational skills required for these monumental projects, the logistics of feeding, housing, and directing tens of thousands of workers for decades. This implies a sophisticated understanding of project management, resource allocation, and social organization that is, in itself, a form of advanced software, if not hardware. The lack of definitive iron tools in the Old Kingdom, when the Giza pyramids were built, iron smelting became more common much later, is another point of contention. While some meteoritic iron was used for rare special objects, like a small iron blade found in Tutankhamun's tomb, which analysis showed was of meteoritic origin, widespread terrestrial iron tool use isn't attested for that early period. Working granite effectively with copper seems almost impossible to many. Did they have a method for hardening copper significantly? Or were there other materials used for cutting edges that haven't survived? The vanished tools and lost wisdom of ancient Egypt remain an open question, a space where scientific inquiry meets speculative imagination. Perhaps we are missing entire categories of tools made from perishable materials. Perhaps their understanding of acoustics, resonance, or even subtle energies played a role in their engineering feats in ways we can't yet comprehend. Or perhaps, as mainstream archaeology largely maintains, their achievements were the result of human persistence and ingenuity pushed to their absolute limits with the tools we know they had. The scattered clues, the precise drill holes, the perfectly flat surfaces, the sheer scale of their accomplishments continue to whisper of a mastery that still eludes our full understanding. As the ancient Egyptian civilization eventually declined and was superseded by others, some of this hard-won knowledge may have simply faded away, deemed unnecessary or too complex by later cultures, leaving us to rediscover it or forever wonder about its true extent. The sands of Egypt have yielded many secrets, but they undoubtedly hold many more, perhaps even the key to understanding this lost technological baseline. As the night deepens and your eyelids grow heavy, let these ancient Egyptian mysteries settle gently in your mind. We've wandered through colossal pyramids and gazed upon the enigmatic Sphinx, pondered strange lights in temple crypts, and descended into the layers of sacred bulls. We've questioned the faces of pharaohs, shivered at whispers of curses, and tried to decipher hieroglyphs that might be more than they seem. From abandoned obelisks and perfectly aligned monuments to lost labyrinths and cryptic king lists, from the esoteric secrets of mummification to the debate over cast stones and missing golden capstones, we've touched upon enigmas that continue to baffle and inspire. The thread that runs through them all is a profound sense of wonder at what this ancient civilization achieved, and a humble recognition of how much we still don't know. These aren't just dusty relics of a bygone era. They are active puzzles, challenging our understanding of the past and the potential of human ingenuity. The faint traces of vanished tools and lost wisdom remind us that history is not always a straight line of progress. Sometimes, knowledge can be forgotten, only to be slowly, painstakingly rediscovered. So as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll dream of starlit desert nights, of skilled hands shaping stone with forgotten techniques, or of ancient priests chanting mysterious litanies. Let the vastness of time and the depth of these unsolved riddles lull you into a peaceful slumber. The answers may be buried deep beneath the sands, or perhaps they are waiting in plain sight, hidden in the very fabric of the stones themselves, for a new generation or a new way of seeing to finally bring them to light. For now, rest. The land of the pharaohs will keep its secrets a little longer.